Okay, on the bench today we have an upside down and backwards Yaesu FT-840, so I've already torn into it. Customer sent this in, and I still need to contact him and see if he wants some other work done to this. But the main thing was he wanted fixed on this was he uses the external speaker jack, and it has become apparently horribly intermittent. Plugs in a speaker, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You jiggle it a little bit, and it cuts in, cuts out, so he wanted that taken care of. Kind of like it's a 20,000 mile, or what I call, 100,000 mile tune-up. So, check the radio over, see if it needs anything. I think he had, when I spoke with him, he had mentioned about doing the electrolytic capacitors in this radio. Man, that's honestly, that's up to him. It's, what is this thing? Just trying to see here. I'd say it was built in 95, because the date codes, and 94, so yeah, it was probably built in 1995. So yeah, it's like 23 years old. I mean, it's yeah, the caps have exceeded the manufacturer's life expectancy. They could be fine for another 20 years. They might start, one might fail tomorrow. It's a customer's call. I'm not going to tell him he needs the caps done, because if they're obviously not causing a problem now, well, they're probably not bad. But yeah, you get to a point with electrolytic capacitors where if you've got a radio in a shop, it's already torn apart, it might not be a bad idea. But yeah, I'll leave that up to him. The other thing he wanted done was to check it over, the 100,000 mile tune-up, see if there's any problems. Now these radios do have a known problem, and it's that resistor right there. So actually, first of all, let's cover this external speaker jack. I kind of figured it was probably, I mean, it's obviously going to be one of two things. If jiggling when you plug in a speaker and you jiggle the connector, it works or doesn't work, that kind of leaves two things. It's either a bad jack or it's a bad solder connection. It's a good quality radio, so I kind of wasn't expecting the jack to be bad, and it's not. It was as I kind of figured it would be, bad solder connections. They just take a lot of stress from jiggling them around. So if we look at this, get zoomed in. How far I can get zoomed in here without going out of focus? That's probably good enough to where you can see it. But yeah, you can. There's halos around. They're cracked out. Yeah, it's not all it's cracked up to be. So yeah, this one here is completely busted out the whole way around. So yeah, that's the problem with the jack. Yeah, I mean, I can see the pin. You can see the pin moving there. Look at that center pin. Actually, the center and the rear pin, they're both just completely busted out. So yeah, that needs to be just resoldered. Yeah, nothing wrong with the jack itself. Now this is a repair you could do yourself. You don't need a lot of technical expertise. Don't exactly need a lot of tools other than, what, a P1 and a P2 Phillips screwdriver, soldering iron, and some solder, honestly, to fix something like this. You just remove the top and bottom covers, take off this rear panel, so this actually just sits on here. And once you take the top and bottom covers off, there's only two screws that hold this rear panel on. Take that off, then just look for all the Phillips screws that go down through this circuit board and attach it to the steel chassis. Remove all of those screws. Now there is a little daughter circuit board right here. It's got some voltage regulators on it. That goes right down here. You can actually see the thermal pad still down in there. So they're just using the steel chassis as a heat sink for these regulators. You can either leave it attached and lift the board up, because it's in a socket. You can see the header pins right here just go into the socket, but I'm going to highly recommend you take this thing off. Whether you take it off, take the two screws out before or after you lift the board up. Definitely pull this thing out. Again, they're voltage regulators, they get hot, and I can see they're starting to get some halos around these solder connections, because of course they're voltage regulators. They're going to get, they're getting hot. So yeah, I'll resolder these. Now when you go to put this board back in, if you're fixing something like this, I highly recommend you actually plug this in to the main board and then push this main board back down in. The reason I say that is if you re-screw this down to the chassis and then try to get this board down on, trying to get this thing lined up with those pins, because you can't see it, it's going to be down up under there, yeah, forget it. Just plug it into the board, then set the board down in, then put the two screws in. That's why, there's an access hole here to get to the screws. Just save yourself some headache. Now to get this board up, you'll see there's two TMP connectors. There's one there that faces in this direction, and there's another one there that faces in that direction. They go into the two TMP sockets right there. Unplug those, because if you don't unplug those, this is about all the farther you're going to get this board up. You can't pick it up very far because those cables are going to basically restrict it. Now, anytime you remove TMP connectors, there's another one right there which you can leave plugged in. But anytime you unplug these connectors or these cables out of these sockets, do not pull them out by the cable. I see so many of these things where people have ripped the cable out of the plug end here. Never ever pull on the cable. Always grab them by the end of the by the plug body itself. Now, of course, the plugs are really small, so just use some needle nose pliers. They got two ears. The way they're crimped, they kind of flattened out. Just grab one of the, get the wire out of the way. Just grab it by one of the ears and pull it out, but grab the body, not the cable. Those cables are so easy to pull out of those things. So just a word of caution there. The other thing is he wanted any known problems fixed in these, and there is a known problem. It's this resistor here, which he was aware of, and he had mentioned. And you can see the circuit board starting to get a little brown down here. This is an 8.2 ohm resistor. Actually, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, get the schematic out here. That could be over on this one. Should be, I'm going to find a 13 lines. Okay, actually 13.5 they call them. It should be right across those two. Okay, yeah, it's right there. That's it. That resistor right there is that large. You can see it says 2 watt. So it's a 2 watt resistor. It just gets too hot. I think it's not that 2 watt resistor isn't big enough. A 2 watt resistor is, large enough to dissipate the amount of energy that it's being asked to. The problem is they use resistors that are just physically, in my opinion, too small. Think about a heat sink on a radio. It doesn't, a heat sink on anything, but just think of a heat sink. You take a transistor, or let's say you use these voltage regulators as an example. Hook power up to these things and put them under load. They get really hot. You get a blister. If you were to touch one of these things, it might get hot enough to where you'll get a blister. You stick it on a little heat sink. Well, it runs colder, and the larger your heat sink gets, the colder and colder it gets, until eventually, if you were to stick on one large enough, it's barely going to get lukewarm. That's because the physical size, it just has more surface area. Bigger surface area, more room or more area to dissipate heat. It just never gets that hot. The problem is the resistors they use in here it may be a 2 watt resistor, and it can handle the heat. The problem is, because physically it's so small, it gets really hot. In my opinion, this is a 2 watt resistor, and this is a 2 watt resistor. And if you set it right beside it, you can see this resistor dwarfs that resistor in size. They can both handle the exact same amount of power dissipation, 2 watts of energy being dissipated. The problem is, that one's really small, that one's really big. This one, if you were to install this one, well, this isn't an 8.2 ohm, but if you were to stick this resistor in there, it's going to be probably half, if not less, the temperature than that one, just because it's physically bigger. Now, I've got tens of thousands of these resistors. This exact style here I've bought over the years. I buy out like old store inventories. And I really like these. These used to be sold over the years by NTE, RCA, Zenith, Mallory. You name the component company that sold repair and service parts. They sold these resistors. Really have no idea what company actually made them, but you can see really good high quality resistors. Yeah, unfortunately, they don't make this exact resistor anymore. Like if you buy them from NTE now, about 2 years ago, I started getting, when I'd order these resistors, you'd start to get these resistors. Yeah, they're just physically smaller. Now this is still a 2 watt resistor, and it's still bigger than the one that's in there. It's longer, it's a little bit bigger around, but yeah, if you can, try to use one that's physically bigger. Yeah, I don't care if that was a 100-watt resistor. It could be a 10,000-watt resistor. If it's still only that big, it's still going to get really hot. It's not so much the wattage rating of the resistor, it's the physical size is the problem. Too small, it gets too hot. So, what can you do? Well, if you can find a vintage, or you can find a new manufacturer, just a larger physical package, 2 watts is just fine. There's nothing wrong with using a 2-watt resistor here. You use one like this, you won't have a problem. You can also, like I say, if the only thing you can get are the more modern styles that are physically smaller, well then just go up in wattage rating. If you go from a 2 to a 3-watt resistor, a modern 3-watt resistor looks more like this, physically in size. Again, more surface area, your problem solved. It doesn't run as hot. Now some people will buy actually resistors that look just like this. They only have 2 leads, but they, in like a TO220 package, you can get them in different styles, and they'll mount them either to the heat sink, or I've seen them mounted to either the side chassis or to, you know, actually this plate that you have to remove. Do you have to do that? Honestly, no. Like I say, just go with a physically larger resistor will solve your problems usually. That's the biggest problem. It's just too stinking small. And while I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and change this one too. Again, it doesn't get as hot as this one, but yeah, this one does get hot. And again, I mean, it's a good Panasonic Matsushita resistor. It's just it's just too blasted small. So yeah, it gets hot. So yeah, increase the size of these physically, and that should eliminate your heat problems. Because like I say, you'll see these things where this whole area of the circuit board is just dark brown. And if you let it go too long, you're going to start, the circuit traces will start to delaminate off the bottom of the board. I actually checked the solder connections on these, and you can see halos starting to form around the 2 leads of this resistor. So yeah, take care of it before it cooks your circuit board, because once you start to damage circuit traces, well then you've got real repairs to do. Instead of just replacing a part, now you're actually having to fix damaged circuit boards. So now's the time to get it before that happens. So let me contact him. Like I said, I'm going to leave it up to him whether he wants to recap this thing or not. It's debatable. Should it or should it not? If it was my radio, I'd do it. But you know, that would be me, and I'm not going to tell somebody they have to when, well, if it's working fine, you know. So I'll leave that up to him. I kind of get the feeling he is going to want to do that because, like I say, there's nothing worse than having your radio fixed and, you know, a couple weeks, a month, even a year or 2 years down the road, it starts to fail again because, yeah, caps are going bad. Then you got to send it back to the shop to get it worked on again. And that plug wasn't plugged in the whole way. So let me get on the honker here and talk to him and see what else he might want done to it, and we'll get her fixed up. So probably the next time you see this, it'll may or may not have the covers on, but you'll see this thing up and running. I think he wanted an alignment because, yeah, this thing really hasn't had, and it doesn't look like the covers have ever really been off. Other than the screws, I could see the screws were off. I think the customer had said he had taken the covers off to see about fixing this. I seem to remember him saying something about that, and he saw it was on the board. It was, yeah, hard to get to, and he decided to send it to somebody that knows what they're doing. Like I say, honestly though, it's not that hard. So if you have one of these intermittent speaker, take top and bottom covers off, take the rear panel off, pull those 2 TMP coax cables out here, lift your board up. Remember to either take the screws out, or you can lift this up and then just take the 2 screws out and take the little daughter board off. But that's probably all it is, just bad solder connections. That's something, like I say, P1 and a P2 screwdriver, roll of solder, and a soldering iron, and you can fix stuff like this yourself. So I'll be back. Okay, so I pretty much got most of the work done to this thing other than putting it back together. Customer, after speaking with the customer, he wanted the of course, what he sent it in for was the speaker jack. Needed to be resoldered to the board on the bottom side. The resistors there, like Buddy would call them, they're, you know, in any radio, but any resistors that get hot, you know, those Chernobyl resistors, that problem has been fixed. Because, yeah, the ones that they use are these tiny little guys here. That is a 2-watt resistor as far as Panasonic Matsushita is concerned. Where in the heck is their logo? It's on there somewhere. Yeah, right there's the little pyramid. We can get it to focus on it. But yeah, it's an 8.2 ohm. I gotta find it here. Where is it? It has a 2W somewhere. Oh, actually, it's right beside the Panasonic logo. It says 2 watts, but yeah, it's a tiny little thing. They just get so hot and they're so close to the circuit board, they just nuke it. So yeah, that's been updated. Asked him if he wanted to change the electrolytic capacitors. Now the radio's working fine, so, and that's one of those, what do you want to do? I leave it up to the customer. I'm not going to tell them they need to replace the capacitors. If the radio's working fine, well, obviously the caps are probably still have some life in them. The problem you run into is, are they going to be bad tomorrow? Next week, next month, next year? Could be 10 years, could be 20 years. That's the problem, you don't know. They've exceeded their life expectancy as far as the manufacturer of the caps is concerned. It's a crap shot. And there's no way to tell how long they're going to last. It's just because that's very environmental, conditions that the radio's stored and used in, operating temperatures. There's just so many variables. So, like I told him, I said, that's up to you. What do you want done? So he has a lot of other radios that he wants worked on that he would rather invest money in right now. So all he wanted me to do was an alignment, other than the other stuff. Oh, and I did replace the light bulb, because it does have a light bulb, or did have a light bulb for the meter. I replaced that with an LED, and it's not a blindingly bright where you're going to have to, that's the one thing I hate, is people put these ungodly bright LEDs in their meters. They're so bright that it's hard to look at the meter and actually read the digits, because now it's just a bloom of light when you look at it. So I use a cool white bulb, or LED, and they're actually the resistor, series resistor that I install in there actually reduces the voltage to it a little bit more than it needs. So yeah, it should pretty much last the life of the customer, but it's a little bit brighter than the original incandescent bulb, but by the same token, it's not blindingly bright. You can see it's a nice, even illumination across the meter, which is what we want. So, like I say, did an alignment to it. Receive sensitivity did pick up a little bit. Transmit was pretty much fine. It's doing, actually the radio will do easily over 100 watts on all bands. I tried it, because actually part of the alignment is you actually turn your RF power control and the internal adjustment up the whole way. And I did check it across all bands, and yeah, this thing was doing like close to 140 watts on some bands. So yeah, it definitely needed to be turned down into where it's supposed to be adjusted at 100 watts. Now, one other thing the customer had mentioned was the rubber for the knob. So that would be this little ring sitting over here. So I took its condom off. His complaint was yeah, it was just kind of falling off. It just kind of, you'd try to grab the knob, and if you didn't squeeze it really hard, just this would spin. The knob itself wouldn't turn. This thing was so loose on there, it just kind of rotated, because it's rubber and it's kind of swelled a little bit over the years. Now, for a lot of radios, these things are next to near or just plain impossible to get replacements for. Now, you can get aftermarket knobs and whatnot, but honestly, there's nothing wrong with this other than it does need to be cleaned, which I'll do after I get the radio back together, clean all the knobs, the faceplate, and everything. But there's an easy way to fix this. Glue. Now, when I say glue, don't go thinking I mean glue this onto the knob, because you need to get to that hole right there. So yeah, you don't want to go gluing this on, because you'll never get to the access hole that lies beneath this. So what you can do is, now what I used was my 3M Go-To glue. Love this stuff. Yeah, 3M, Loctite, all the same company, but anyhow, Go-To glue. It's a kind of a rubbery, it doesn't dry hard, it stays rubbery. It's kind of like silicone, but man, this stuff just sticks so much better, and it's a lot stronger. But what I do, put the bottle back over there, is take, actually I can show you, just grab a piece of it, just a piece of plastic. Okay, this is actually laminating material for like when I'm making, when I laminate cards and whatnot. You can use anything. Piece of cut off credit card, shoot a couple folded up pieces of paper. But just make a little, like a spatula is basically what you want. You could use a knife, it doesn't really matter. But what I do is take a little bit of glue. Now you could use silicone, anything that's kind of but what you want is a glue that once it's dry still has a lot of, how should I say, surface friction. It stays rubbery is I guess the point. So you just put a little light bead of that glue the whole way around the inside. Then you take your little piece, and actually it should be down here in the trash can, the piece that I used. Yep, there it is. You can even see some of the glue remnant on there. Just make yourself, like I say, a little spatula, and then just spread that out. And you can see how it's shiny in there. Get the light just right. That's what that is in there. That's glue. But it's dried now. It's been sitting for about 2 hours. So it's, it's tack free, but when you try to rub your finger across it, it's very rubbery. It's very grabby. So that's an easy way to fix your little knob rubber here, or condom. So now you can see, just one finger, you can touch it, and you can turn the knob without that rubber, because before, if you did this, yeah, the rubber would spin. That's all that would happen. So yeah, just take a little bit of glue, like I say, RTV, silicone, anything like that would work. I know the go-to glue works really good. I love that stuff. But yeah, just make a little spatula, just spread, but you don't want a thick layer of that stuff, because if you make it too thick, then you're going to make this thing spread out even farther than it should. That's why you want to use something like this to make a very, very thin layer of that glue in there. You just want to tack it. You make it tacky. That's all you want to do. Just enough thin layer to make it tacky so that it can't slip on the plastic knob there. So let me get the cover put back on, or covers put back on this thing, get it cleaned up a little bit better, and we'll see what she looks like. And there's a little bit of CW fading in and out. Not exactly ideal time of the day to be listening to 7 megahertz. So she's all back together. Got the faceplate cleaned up, and it's a good looking radio. It's got a few little bit of scratching, a few scratches right there on that side of the cover. Other side's in good shape. Top's in really good shape. Yeah, other than, like I say, a few little scratches back there, it's a really nice looking radio. And it is modification free. It will not, it has not had Mars. I'll just flip down. Let's see, get into fast. AM, actually mode doesn't matter. So I can show it still has not had the Mars cap mod done to it. Still has it left the factory. I'll get a microphone hooked up. Switch over to a dummy load. And see if I key the microphone, we're in power meter. Power up. You can see we transmit, and if I go down, you can see the power drops down. The instant you drop down below 28 megahertz. Get up above 28, and we transmit again. So it has not had the Mars cap mod done to it. So, yep, pretty much just like it left the factory, other than a few little minor repairs to it and an alignment. So this one's ready to put back in the box now. Yeah, it's a shame there's not really much coming in right now. Weather conditions horrible here. Skip's horrible. Actually, Skip's just been horrible pretty much on almost all bands today. Just squeezing through a little bit of CW on a few of the bands. But yeah, as far as voice communications goes, it's pretty much been just dead. Probably give it an hour, and yeah, the floodgates will open up on me after I get the radio boxed up. But anyhow, there you go. There's a Yaesu FT-840 that's had a few minor repairs and ready to send back to the customer.